Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I'm Uranio Paes.
And today we're talking about the psychological dimension of the instincts and how the instincts play a role in driving our personality.
Yeah, super important. And we used to say that there are 5 different dimensions of instincts, and the psychological one is important. And I guess it's useful for us to say that we don't really agree when we hear sometimes people saying that the instincts have no psychological dimension or are only evolutionary, because all things inside us are interconnected. And as you're going to see, we will say very specific things that we have been learning for a long time from our students that are indeed psychological patterns underneath the 3 instincts, both in the dominant and in the repressed states, right, B?
Yes, and might be good to do a little bit of review about the instincts and the role they play in our personality from the Enneagram point of view. As you said, this is something that we not only just believe as a theory, but something that we've seen play out when we work with individuals in our work retreats, in coaching, and different settings.
And this is over and over and over again all over the world, right?
Right, exactly. So something that we've seen plays out when people are doing inner work based on the Enneagram. So the instincts are basically body-based biological imperatives. They are the part of us humans, that we share with animals of all kinds. And we are animals. So it reminds us that we have animal wisdom, which is a positive thing. But we're also driven to a large extent by survival instincts in the same ways that animals are. However, animals in some ways are a little bit more clean and free when it comes to their instincts. We humans, because we think and we have emotions, the instincts kind of get tied up with or mixed up with our emotional patterns, our mental patterns. And the instincts are located in the belly center, the physical or the body center. But again, our patterns of thinking, our patterns of emotions, feeling, and our patterns of sensing, experiencing, but also our instinctual intelligence gets mixed up. It's not like each of these 3 centers, each of these 3 kinds of functions or experience are completely disconnected from each other. In the human being, in the personality, these things are really combined and mixed up. And we sometimes say that the instincts in the human personality are distorted, right? And when we do inner work and go to higher levels of awareness, the instincts become undistorted. So in health at higher levels, they operate only as needed and in proportion to what is needed in an objective sense, in terms of the experience that we're having. But in personality, the instincts get mixed up with the emotions and the mental patterns, and they overfunction. They get mixed up with the passion of the type, which is the core emotional motivator. So they get distorted in 2 ways. One is they get mixed up with the personality patterns, so that our instincts aren't just operating freely based on what's actually happening. They're operating on the patterns that we have, the beliefs we have, the persistent emotional experience we have. And they're also either over functioning, as when one of these 3 instincts is dominating our experience, takes up a lot of room and a lot of our focus. And we believe that one of these 3 instincts is repressed. So we all have all 3 instincts. One tends to dominate, so we'll refer to an instinct being dominant, and we'll refer to an instinct being repressed. And we believe it's more than a blind spot; it's actually pushed out of awareness. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. And then one is kind of usually in the middle, and we refer to these 3 instincts in each person, as each person having an instinctual sequence. And of course, the three instincts are, as a review, and again, grouped in these ways in the Enneagram model in terms of self preservation, social instinct, or sexual instinct, which we sometimes refer to as one on one in certain settings. But really, it's the sexual instinct. And by the way, these three instincts were talked about from the beginning of the Enneagrams coming forward in the modern era by Oscar Ichazo. And he made them rather central to the way he described the Enneagram in the way that he described it in the very beginning. Anything you would add to that sort of upfront overview introduction that gives us more of the foundation to then explore the dimensions, and especially the psychological dimension?
I don't think so for now. I can add later, and I always appreciate your capacity to structure and and things, and that comes from the self-pres instinct.
Yes, I'm self-preservation dominant, and so sometimes I think in terms of outlines and structure, and I think that's one aspect of the self-preservation instinct. But we're going to talk about the what we've noticed as dimensions of the instincts, right? So the instincts are these survival drives in the ways I just described, but when we experience our instincts as part of our personality, our whole human experience, we find that there are different dimensions to them that give even added meaning to the way the instincts function in our lives and the way they drive us. And of course, things we need to become aware of if we are going to really be doing the inner work that the Enneagram directs us to do in terms of becoming more and more aware of all the different elements of what motivates us.
Yeah, we talk about five, sometimes even more, but we concentrate on five dimensions of instincts, and we'll cover one mostly, but here are the five. The behavioral dimension, in which there are key or behavioral tendencies, sets of behavioral tendencies for the three dominant instincts and the three repressed instincts. So, this is the behavioral dimension. And then we have the psychological dimension that we're going to talk about today. Then we have the somatic dimension and how each of the instincts operate in our bodies and how what happens when they are uh, dominant and repressed and more other somatic considerations. Then we have a historic collective dimension of the instincts that connect to family systems, to societies of origin, and even things connected to our ancestors, and that are well explained even by family constellations theory. And then the spiritual dimension of instincts, when they are not distorted, and also when our dominant instinct comes back to operating in a healthy, totally healthy way, and what it brings us as actually spiritual capacities. But today we're going to concentrate on the psychological dimension. And there are two groups of things that we are going to talk about related to the psychological dimension. One is the parental complexes, the relationship with the mother and father figures. I hope you can share more on this part. And then we can talk about a second group, which is psychological shadows connected to the three instincts, both in the dominant and in the repressed way. Maybe you can start with the parental, uh, dimension of the psychological dimension.
Yes. So, our intention here, of course, is to explore this dimension of the instincts um, in the expectation that it may help you gain some clarity around some of your own psychology that's related to these instincts, and some of your patterns and things, elements of your personal history that may be good to be more aware of, because understanding these psychological dimensions really does help us understand why we do the things we do, especially as connected to the instinctual drives. Okay, so when we're talking about psychology, of course, in human terms, we're talking about what starts in childhood, how we come to develop our personality beginning in early experience, that's always necessarily based in our early relationships with caregivers. Now I'll be talking in terms of mother, father, feminine figure, masculine figure, but I really want to emphasize that I know that in this age of deeper understanding of gender fluidity, I will be using these terms, but just know that these terms do allow for fluidity, right? There is more masculine, less masculine, more feminine, less feminine. There is the nurturing feminine figure, and there is the masculine father figure, the nurturing mother figure. So these are archetypes. I really want to emphasize that. And there is room for flexibility and nuance and fluidity within these. But I will talk in terms of these partly because this is how psychology views these things, sort of the mother figure, the father figure, the nurturing figure. But of course, we are talking about situations that span different kinds of experiences these days. So it could be, two mothers or two fathers. This is we're including this very intentionally,
Very
uh,
inclusive, right, B?
very inclusive, but again, don't let my language fool you because I may talk about the feminine archetypal figure, the mother figure. But just know that if you have two fathers, there can be one of them that tends to fulfill the role, maybe of the sort of archetypal mother, feminine, nurturing figure.
And also when in the situations where the father himself plays more of the feminine role and the mother plays more of the masculine role.
Yes.
While there are some theories, approaches that talk about a few problems that can be consequences of this, I think from a modern perspective, this is also very valid. So there is the masculine function and the feminine function operating somehow.
There is this duality, but this duality is also a spectrum, right? And different genders can play different roles, right? So please keep that in mind, even while, for ease of flow, I may use the language of feminine and masculine and mother figure and father figure. But know that that's archetypal. Okay, so psychological dimension of the instinct. So I'll talk about the self-preservation instinct first. And again, you can, if you're new to our discussion of instincts, we have podcasts that discuss the instincts, that you can refer to if you need to. But the self-preservation instinct is in this psychological dimension connected to the mother figure, the feminine caregiver figure that, again, because starting with birth, the child experiences the relationship with the mother almost as a unitary experience. So, being in the womb and then in the first months after birth, the child experiences that mother and child are one. And then gradually, the child, as it grows, after the second or third month of life, differentiates out of that experience. So, what does that mean? It means that the mother, in this very foundational way, is the first protective figure. And because self preservation instinct is connected to this very visceral sense of, is my life at risk? My life is threatened. What do I do when my life is threatened? I need to, employ certain very instinctual imperatives that assure my survival. Right. This is the self-preservation instinct is very focused on, will I survive? What do I need to do to survive? Now, again, we try not to talk too much in depth about these instincts, these three groupings of instincts, because once we mix them up with the types, and in a way that we get a subtype of the main type. So there are three different ones, and one of the type ones is a self preservation one of the ones is a social one of the ones is a sexual one. Then, once this instinct mixes up with the type, they don't always look the same. Not all nine types, when they're self-preservation, look exactly the same. So, but that's what I said is a little bit of a general description of what self-preservation instinct focuses on. Now, it's connected to the mother because it begins very early in life. It gets set up even before birth. And so self preservation instinct is connected to the mother because when the child is in the womb, it's just the mother and the baby for a period of time, and then even after birth. And so often people who are self preservation dominant or self preservation repressed will have very specific mother issues psychologically, right? So, how this often works is there is either psychologically, as the person grows, a very strong attachment to the mother figure. Mother might loom large, again, the mother figure in that person's experience, because that's the caregiver that they're reliant on from before birth and the first year of life. And that is the sense of protection because human babies have the longest period of dependency of any mammal. So there's a lot of need for protection and a lot of vulnerability as a baby, as an infant, as a small child. And so a lot of reliance on that mother for survival, for protection in the earliest, most vulnerable years of life. And again, even in the womb. And so there is often in self preservation dominance either usually one of two different scenarios that plays out as a life theme. One is this kind of overdone attachment to mother. Like maybe long after childhood, my mother is still very central in my life. I'm very focused on my mother, or I'm very focused on the relationship with my mother. Maybe I still have a need for my mother. Maybe I still, um, you know, focus on that relationship more than many other relationships, because there's this ongoing sense of a need for protection. Now, on the other side, on the other hand, sometimes it can go in a different direction, which is there is this central need for mother. But then, if mother didn't meet all my needs in some way, if that caregiver wasn't fulfilling their role as protector in an optimal way, let's say, then it can be a little bit like I need to distance myself from my mother and then kind of fulfill that role myself. Like I'm kind of on my own and I need to assure my own survival, my own protection. And of course, because I need to do that without mother, that can be overdone. So there's overcompensation in terms of I worry really a lot about myself.
I will mother myself.
I have to get along without mother. And there may be some resentment there. There may be a complicated relationship or complicated feelings about mother. But the general thing is, I distance myself and I take on that role myself, even though that may be hard and it may be something that is difficult and challenging because starting from a young age, children aren't built to protect themselves, right? So maybe I had to provide more for myself in terms of protection and survival than I really should have had to. But
Mhm.
because my mother wasn't there or wasn't fulfilling that role in the best way, I've had to do that. So it's
Yeah.
either way, it's a over focus on self preservation themes, either because my mother provided that and I'm still overly attached to her and needing her to provide that in the way that she did and not moving on, not like growing beyond that. And then in a healthy way, taking that on myself at a certain point in life. Or I had to distance myself and take on that role too early in life. And then I become really preoccupied with protecting myself in all these different ways and all the different manifestations that the self-preservation instinct can manifest.
Yeah. A few comments before I go on. B. I think we always need to think in paradoxes when it comes to good Enneagram theory. And one of the paradoxes here in the psychological dimension of the Enneagram when related to the mother figure is that I have this big need of dependency on the mother, and I also go to the other extreme, which is being super self sufficient and autonomous. And that is different from something that we see a bit more in the sexual instinct, which is codependency. Nothing to do with that. It's really like I depend a lot or I won't depend at all because of my fear of not seeing my dependency being accomplished, being fulfilled. And also, I do agree that protection is a key word here for the self-press instinct related to the mother figure. I just want to add a few other words like nurturing, also caring, and even something like the hugging figure. I think all of this is pretty much what is expected from wherever this feminine energy comes from. It's the feminine, right? And yeah, so what do you think? Do you agree with this?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Yeah, makes a lot of sense and good to expand a little bit on what I said. I think what I'd like to talk about before you talk about the shadows is what happens when I mainly just talked about what happens when it's dominant, but now I want to say a little bit about what happens when the self-preservation instinct is repressed in someone. And I think everything I just said applies to the dominant. And with the repressed self preservation instinct, often the person didn't get what they needed from the mother figure and kind of gave up on that completely. It's as if it's too painful on some unconscious level to hope for that, to look for that, because it was not provided. And also, we believe that we come in with our instinctual sequence already set up. And there may be also an inner program in addition to the experience of not having had the mother providing what was needed. I don't really need that. I'm gonna kind of focus on other spheres of life and and completely deprioritize self protection of any kind. Would you add anything to that as a self preservation repressed person yourself?
Yeah, I think I disconnected a lot from the mother figure because of a an emotional sense of unavailability. Although my mother was really there as a nurturer, and this explains to me a little bit how the self-pres repressed instinct play out. So I didn't feel as much that connection, but I also didn't feel as much the need for that connection. And for a long time, until I worked on this in therapy, I, I would mostly feel okay with all of that, and even think, oh, I'm just a very independent, very self-sufficient, and on the other hand, I what I noticed is that I didn't have as much of the bonding and connection as other people had there. But I would think it was my style, which later I learned to call type 5. But yeah, it has to do with the self-preservation repressed.
Right, right. And I think you'll say more when you talk about the shadows. So maybe this is a good moment for you to talk a bit about the shadows of the self preservation instinct when it comes to this psychological dimension.
Yeah, one of the shadows is that self preservation dominant people tend to be a little bit like self referencing, and sometimes to the point of at least coming across as being a little bit selfish, like me first. And there are things in which we need to look at ourselves first. It's important, but sometimes there is an exaggeration for self-pressed dominance in which they see themselves really more than they see others. And I think this selfishness is many times a blind spot for self-pressed dominance. It's easier for people around to notice and feel that than for themselves to admit and spot that in place. So this is why it's a shadow, and it's a shadow of in the competition for life, for resources. I'll protect myself so that I can thrive, and I hope that others do that too and they thrive too. But I'll save my soul first, you know, and that is a little bit like leads sometimes to a more individualistic person and sometimes opportunistic, which can also be a shadow. But then another shadow is that self-preservation dominance conserve what they have. By the way, the original name in Spanish, which is the original language of the Enneagram, because both Oscar Ichazo and Claudio Naranjo were originally Spanish speakers, the term was conservación, which is conservation. Like I'm conserving what I have, and I don't go for more, and I play safer, and I am defended in those things that are already there. And as a consequence, I would name this shadow a shadow of a little bit of um, another kind of selfishness, which is selfishness of not giving all of myself to the world or to other people. Like I retain what I have, what I am, and what I do, and I don't manifest as much. I learn to live with less. And one example, like it's harder for people who are self preservation dominants to make the decision of moving from a job to another one that they know they will be happier and they will be like following more of their true purpose, because they conserve. But also it becomes a very big blind spot, the simple thought that the world will miss that other people will not benefit from what I have to give. There is a blind spot which can be called selfishness. Selfishness, as in, I'm not really dedicating myself to others and to the world, and I'm looking at my own interests. So, these are the shadows I will emphasize here at the podcast. We talk so much more about this on our courses, and we do work on them on retreat.
And by the way, we also recently did a webinar on the somatic dimension of the instincts for our online community platform. But I think I just wanted to emphasize one last thing that you said is it's almost like there's this sense of looking out for number one, um, or doing it myself without help as a positive thing and not seeing the negatives of that. And also, it's I think the shadow of the the self-preservation instinct is behind a lot of the corruption in the world, right? It's all about self-interest and not thinking about others or about the collective or the community. Okay. Anything else about self preservation instinct, or should we talk about the social instinct and its psychological dimension?
Well, don't let me talk for a couple of hours here. So, let's move on to social.
Yes. Okay. So the social instinct is connected to the father in this psychological dimension. So, similar to what I said about the mother figure, the father figure, or the masculine archetypal figure, is connected to the social instinct for a couple of reasons. One is by the time the child developmentally gets to the age a little bit older where they can relate to the mother and the father, it's already a group. So a group starts at three people. A social environment starts with three. So the family group, of course, is the first group we humans experience, and it, there are many different family organizations, of course, but the sort of archetypal father, mother, child, siblings extended family. This is the first social environment that the child experiences. And so at a slightly older age, they get more in touch with that social instinct. How am I relating to the group? What's my place in the group? Am I being heard in the group? Do I belong? Do I have a sense of inclusion? All of these things are kind of basic to the social instinct. And the father also is archetypally the figure that pushes the child out of the nest, that pushes the child into the world. And optimally, again, there's an optimal way that this father role is played. It's I support the child, and I bring them to the world in a very supportive way. It's almost like creating a bridge between the smaller world of the family, of childhood, into adulthood, into the going out into the world and experiencing life beyond the family. And the father is archetypally the person who facilitates that developmental process for the child. So bringing that child into the world in a way that, again, optimally, the child feels powerful, grows into a healthy adult, has a sense of confidence, has a sense of openness to others, and a sense of belonging to the community or the group. This is sort of what the social instinct is all about, and gives social dominant people a sense of almost an attunement to the collective or the group. Now, it doesn't always mean social dominant does not always mean I like to be in groups or I'm comfortable being in groups. It's more that my relationship to the groups that I'm in my world is central. And whatever that relationship is, it might be being slightly outside the group and leading the group. So that it just to sort of expand what we might think of as a typical social definition. But in terms of the father, often social dominants have this, again, similar to what I said with the mother. The father looms large somehow in the psyche of that person. Either the father was a very positive influence or really there, sometimes even idealized by the person, of like, wow, this person, is really someone we look to for guidance and a sense of protection in a different way from the way the mother serves as a protective figure. The father figure is someone who is what we look up to, and that we feel a sense of learning about how to be in the world from watching their example and from the guidance that they provide. Now, of course, just like with the mother, some social dominants are overly attached to their father, right? The father was really maybe there. And so that relationship is very central. And they even over rely, or rely on the father well after childhood more than average, right? So again, the optimal growth is you rely on the father for a period of time, but then the father brings you to the world, and then you're in the world not needing the support of the father forever, but because you had it in the right ways at a pivotal transition point. But then, of course, there's the second category of people who their father wasn't there and they're social dominant. The father wasn't really fulfilling the optimal function that they might fulfill. And so there's a sense of lack or absence that now I have to fill that in myself. I have to be the one who is the leader. I have to be the one who is taking myself to the world, or uh, being preoccupied with issues of belonging or inclusion or relationship to the collective. Now I overdo that because I'm somehow compensating for not getting what I needed from my father. Now, of course, when we don't get what we need from our father figure, it can go either way. Some of those people are social dominant, some become social repressed. And again, you're probably wondering, is this nature or nurture? And always remember that from the point of view that most people agree on now in terms of childhood development in the Enneagram, it's both. It's nature and nurture. We come in with an inner program, and then we also typically experience things in our life that matches up in some way with that inner program in terms of what we need to learn through being challenged in our life. So with the social instinct, it's either the over reliance on that father figure, over attachment to the father figure, or I need to take that on myself. And so I'm very focused on issues of the collective that touch that activate the social instinct, and I can overdo that if I'm dominant, or if I'm a repressed social instinct individual. If I have that instinct that's repressed in me, it goes the other way. I don't really want to deal with groups or the collective. I feel skeptical of groups. I don't trust groups of people. I keep myself out of that, and I don't really learn a kind of facility with relating to groups of people. I may be tone deaf when it comes to like saying awkward things, or lacking a sense of tact when communicating in a community of people. And I may be awkward when it comes to social environments. I may feel fearful. I may kind of keep myself out just from a sense of safety of interacting if I'm socially repressed, because it's a giving up on that whole thing. And I kind of don't even want to go there.
Yeah, very good points. As a social dominant, I can relate to almost everything you said, and to different parts actually. Like my father was great in many important ways for me, but there was a lot in terms of taking me to the world and more that didn't happen very often, and a few other things like not playing really with me as a kid. But as a social dominant, I would emphasize the very few times that I had that with him, and would feel really happy with those. So I wouldn't sense as much the lack, and that became a bit unconscious. And then I would provide all of that for myself in different ways, and I ended up, in different ways, going out to the world to conquer, and as I said, in different ways. So it's interesting. Thank you for sharing all of that.
I would say go ahead and talk about the shadow of the social instinct.
Yeah, one of the shadows is putting people first in ways that are excessive and not healthy, both for self and others. And in a way, playing the adult prematurely in families and more. And that hides one of the biggest shadows, which is the superiority complex. I put myself above others when I think that I'm the one that needs to do everything for them, and I don't have needs. So sometimes we refer to this as being the social dominant pride, and yet it's not an emotional thing. It's more like an instinctual drive to be above, and that comes from the social, more the purest form of the social instinct, as in I need to prevail in this tribe or this band. I need to climb up the social hierarchy and become a leader, hopefully, or at the very least be important in all this system. So there is this drive to differentiate, to stand above, and that is sometimes a shadow. Also because it makes the person, self promote a little, or do politics too much, or just compete in ways that sometimes are more hidden, because what shows up more is cooperation, right? The cooperative side. But there is a competition drive that is shadowy, in which the person really wants to come first deep inside and to be above. Sometimes we also talk about a shadow for the social dominant, naming it as the God complex, with different things like arrogance, or the person who believes they know it all, or that can be everywhere doing everything, and as I said, taking care of everything and everybody, and who also has this grandiosity complex of I'll transform everything, the world, so the all powerful in a way. So these are a few shadows I can refer to about the social dominant.
Yeah, I think sometimes in families, they're like, if the father figure, let's say, leaves the family, there's a divorce, or even the father's there but is very unavailable energetically, emotionally. It's like the social dominant child sometimes often fills that role, becomes the protector of the family or of siblings, or becomes the partner of the mother. Not, we'll talk about that a little bit in the sexual instinct, but more from a sense of, I'm taking care of the family because my father didn't fulfill that role. So it, again, this, it's, can be out of balance, and that's, I take on that role too much from too early an age. Like you said, it can be, social dominants are often people who grew up too early and became sort of someone higher on the hierarchy than they normally maybe should have, if in the normal order of things. And so have this sense of arrogance, or overdoing a kind of importance. So with the sexual instinct, in terms of the psychological dimension, the sexual instinct for sexual dominant people, well, for sexual dominant or repressed, has to do with the father mother child triangle. And again, remember, this is archetypal. So, according to the Oedipus complex or the Electra complex that Freud talked about, there is this sort of human development aspect where, again, the sort of archetypally masculine child competes with the masculine figure for the attention of the female, the mother figure, and the child, the female child, competes archetypally with the mother figure for the attention of the father. So it's this father mother child triangle that's very central in the sexual complex, sexual instinct. And often, and it's amazing how much we find this, that, like, for instance, a girl or a young woman or even an older woman, when the sexual instinct is dominant, has a really strong bond with her father. And again, this is archetypal. Sometimes we've seen it, for instance, where a woman can have a very strong bond with her mother, and kind of had gone against the father in some ways, and was competing with the father for the attention of the mother. But again, for ease of flow, I'll stick with the sort of the old language. And so there's, as if there's a rivalry. And remember, the sexual instinct is a lot about the energy of rivalry. In the animal kingdom, it's like, competing for the mate, so that your genes can get passed on, or competing for that partner, the mate, so that you get that companion relationship, that bonding experience that you want with with the person, the animal, that you want to be connected to deeply. And so the rivalry here is within the family in this triangle. And we find a lot of situations where, for instance, the the woman was daddy's little girl, or there was a divorce and the girl was sort of daddy's partner in a certain kind of way. Again, even when there is no, explicit boundary violation or abuse or anything, it's this sort of really strong connection, for the girl, for the father, really strong connection with a boy, with his mother. And again, archetypal mother figure. There's this really strong bonding and focus on connecting with that particular person and winning out over the rival. And again, usually we find that the sexual dominant person was what we call the Oedipal winner, meaning that they did win over that person. Now, even if the parents stayed together and maybe got along reasonably well, sometimes there's a special relationship that the child had with one of the parents, a special closeness. Maybe they were the favorite. Maybe there were ways that the partner relationship didn't meet all the person's needs, and they unconsciously looked to one of the children to fulfill that need. And so, such that the sexual dominant becomes really focused on this very special connection with one of the parents, very intense connection. And so, what we find, and then for the sexual repressed person, we find that usually they were the Oedipal loser. So, they didn't manage to kind of penetrate the father mother relationship, that they were left out. They didn't win over the father from the mother or the mother from the father archetypally. They and maybe didn't get the attention that they needed in terms of having a kind of healthy sexual development. And by the way, the Oedipus complex is this idea that if it's handled really well by the parents, it supports optimal sexual development in the children, and having an identity, a sexual identity that is healthy. So in the sexual repressed person, it's like I didn't really get seen. I didn't really get what I needed from one of my parents to really feel kind of confident and good about myself as a relationship partner, but especially as a sexual being, in order to feel at my best, at my most confident, at my healthiest in being an adult that then has partners and sexual experience. So the idea being that the sexual repressed people kind of give up on that. It's like, I'm not going to compete. I'm not going to compete for the rival because I'll just lose, right? So it's like a proactive giving up of those kinds of deep bonding experiences, because there was this sort of psychological foundational experience of like, that doesn't work for me. I don't get what I need in that kind of experience, that kind of relationship, and other people become more important than I am. What would you add? We do find that, interestingly, when we are working with people in our inner work retreats, or working with people, in psychotherapy or coaching, that sexual dominants have a really strong, often continuing, deep, energetic, almost umbilical connection to one of the parents. And sometimes what it means is the sexual dominant person doesn't have room energetically to really connect with a partner later on. We've worked with people where, even after the parent that they were deeply connected to died, that sexual dominant person is still really focused on that parent and experiences a lot of pain when that person passes away or when they're not there. And that disconnection is feels almost impossible because that bonding is so deep.
Yeah, totally. And I would add just that these whole mechanism leads to a lot of intensity in the connections, but not emotional intensity. It's not emotional, although it might look like. It's mostly something that is, I want to create this merger, this bonding by all means, and I go towards very intensely. So, one of the shadows here is that sexual dominant people hook the other person, like I seduce. So sometimes it's not unconscious, but many times the sensuality and the seduction is more unconscious. And it's there are mechanisms that go beyond just seducing. It's like, I'll keep you hooked to me somehow, and that creates dependency from the other. But I'm codependent, and the other depending on me. And sometimes also there is a paradox that I do that, but I also, put everything at risk. And I change all of that because I need to feel that intensity. It's almost like the intensity of the coming together and the intensity of breaking away. So too much intensity and everything gets a bit exaggerated. Another thing is the aggression shadow, which is, I'm more confrontational. I'm someone who is more intimidating and super competitive in the sense of rivalry. I build rivalry all the time, and that is perceived as a big competition. and then I want that other person to be mine, exclusive to me, and I won't share anything. And it's like, it's even hard for sexual dominant parents, for instance, when their kids start sort of having the attention and the care from their partners. And there are even shadows we see at times that the sexual dominant parent pushes away the kids from their partner and competes a lot against those kids. And then a shadow of anger, which tends to be bigger, in my view, for sexual dominance. And when it's the sexual repressed, it's again all the opposite, which can be problematic just the same.
Any last things you want to say about this topic generally before we stop?
Well, just how important this is. I hope that our listeners here are really, getting in touch with how deep instincts can go and how important it is to consider the psychological dimension of all this and not just the behavioral and evolutionary side, but also how deep this can go. We could talk here for hours and keep talking about psychological patterns and tendencies. And I also hope that everybody can see that there is a lot of work to do on ourselves when it comes
Yes.
to all of this.
Yeah, this is what I was going to add, that there's work to be done depending on what your instinctual sequence is around all of this. So it can create an aspect of the agenda that you might pursue for inner work, thinking about what do I need to work on. It might mean like letting go of the attachment to your mother, or letting go of some idealization of your father, or letting go of, or working psychologically on the issues with your parents that you have. Like maybe working more, healing more of the wound around my father wasn't there for me, or my mother didn't meet my needs, or that father, mother, child triangle, archetypal triangle, was something that was hard in specific ways for me and that I need to address. So, again, we hope that you hear this as setting an agenda for some work that you might need to do, depending on your sequence. One last thing I want to say is, I when Uranio first was teaching me this and introduced me to this idea, I have to say, being a self-preservation dominant, I'm always a little bit skeptical, right? I'm always a little bit hesitant. Like, do we really want to start teaching something before we're really sure it's really the best theory, or reflects the truth of our human experience? And I have to say, over and over and over and over again, I've found what we've described here to play out in amazing way. Like it always holds true, and if it doesn't hold true for you in some way, either you have a variation on this theme, that you may need to look at, or you don't maybe have your sequence correct, because I've just been really surprised and amazed as we've gone through these years in our Enneagram school and working with people and seeing the different ways that this kind of these universal themes connected to the instincts play out in ways that are really, really foundational to people's experience, and of course points in important ways to the growth path.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for a pleasant talk today, B.
Yes. So that brings us to the end of this episode. We hope that you'll join us again next time for the Enneagram 2.0 podcast, where we talk about all things Enneagram.